Let's talk about how I got up here. I guess I could talk about being self-employed, and I guess I have to talk about how I got to that. So I've been on my own for 12 years, but leading up to that, I did warranty repair. I did warranty repair for Dell as one of their warranty repair technicians. That lasted a little over 3 years. That workload dropped off. But in the beginning, I had a lot of people I worked with. I mean, a lot of customers. What that job entailed is me doing warranty repair in the comfort of the customer's either business place or home. So, what I learned is how to deal with people. I don't know if you're familiar with people being technically oriented. They tend to not be very people-y. Anyway, people would keep my phone number. So that allowed me to do work outside of the confines of that job. So that's how I ended up getting into my sole proprietorship. So a lot of those Dell customers would hire me for non-warranty repair work. I've had customers continue to hire me to this day, well, up until very recently, for their IT support, mostly for residential support. So anyway, doing warranty repair, it was a 100% commission job, doing nothing but warranty repairs for Dell. My employer was not technically Dell, but the warranty repair was for Dell. So that's ultimately how I got into doing my own thing. I'm trying to be very short but accurate about how I got to where I am today. All right, so that is how I got to be the South Bay Tech Guru. I was born and raised in LA, the South Bay. If you want to look that up, you can see where that is. But anyway, I was born and raised in Redondo, well, born and raised in Los Angeles, mostly raised in Redondo Beach. The South Bay Tech Guru, that's me. So if you go further back into this YouTube channel, you'll notice a lot of IT content. What I noticed is starting at the pandemic, it was very, obviously it was a shock to everyone. I was another local business professional, and I realized it was beginning to be a new environment, very slow. The pandemic was my first experience where people would actually cancel on me. I don't want you in my house. People were just super afraid of it. Anyway, so where was I? The pandemic was a huge reason as to how I got up here. Now let's face it, I'm a sole proprietor. After 12 years, I wasn't able to grow my company. There are certain decisions I might have been able to make that were better. I had a very small office in Redondo Beach. It was 200 square feet. That's a one-car garage, doing nothing but computer repairs. Now, I did a lot of house calls, but I had the shop. So the rent was relatively cheap, but the place was very small. After 4 years, I realized that I'd outgrown it. So the rent was cheap, but I needed bigger space. I found a bigger space just north in Manhattan. Rent was actually cheaper. The space was slightly bigger. So I go to a slightly more affluent neighborhood. Not that Redondo is cheap, but I was lured into that direction. So the business decision was get a slightly bigger office in a slightly more affluent town. Let's see how that works. So anyway, the mistake was taking an office that was falling apart. I probably chose an office in the most dilapidated building in the South Bay. The rent was fair, but the facade, I mean, it was meant to look like it was falling apart. I mean, it was meant to look like an 1800s style complex, but it was falling apart. Literally, the facade was starting to show the underside of the building, not the way it was intended. So anyway, that was probably not the best business decision. I probably should have found another bigger place, but ultimately it would have been more expensive. So how did I get up here? Let's stick to that. So the pandemic, plus me choosing an office that was visually less than aesthetically pleasing in a very affluent community in the South Bay. After 2 or 3 years, I realized the business wasn't coming back after the pandemic. I had lost business because the office was not the best place, but also the pandemic. It killed the culture of me showing up in homes, sitting shoulder to shoulder with a stranger. That's kind of what got me to where I am today. I finally, after a few years after the pandemic, I realized I was going to have to get serious about going back to the regular workforce. Yeah. I had issues with the regular workforce. One of my issues is I had spent most of my 20s, well, the first part of my 20s, I worked retail. So obviously for most people, retail is probably the first job you experience. I worked a few jobs and moved on, but ultimately I'd known by high school I'd loved tech. Where was I going with this? I realized that's why I was going with this. Finding a job in tech is not particularly difficult, whether you're new or good at it, but I spent most of my life, let's just say the second 2/3 in tech in my 20s as a temporary employee, as a tech. My first real job full-time as a technically oriented was sales. That was in 2004. That lasted about a year, working for PC Mall. That was a sales job, 100% sales, but it was technically oriented. So I was a technical professional working in a sales position. That was my first job, full-time, non-temp oriented. But anyway, after that, I'd take a few jobs as a temp, bouncing around. 6 months here, a year there, 3 months here. I realized getting a job full-time is sort of a challenge. So anyway, long story short, I'm going to just cut to the chase. I landed a permanent job, but not full-time, working for a company that supports warranty repair for Dell. That's how I ended up doing warranty repair for Dell. And people would eventually hire me, non-warranty people would end up with me as their tech for their warranty repair, and then ultimately keeping my phone number. They would call me for non-warranty repair work. So anyway, that job lasted almost 4 years, warranty repair. But ultimately, during my slower days, people would call me and I would be able to accrue a client base. And that's ultimately how I got to working as a sole proprietor, doing my own thing. It ultimately got me the ability to get my own little shop. That shop was 200 square feet. I got that bigger shop, and ultimately I got one more bigger shop back in Redondo, but that was not the best decision because it didn't have the walking space, the walking traffic that I originally had. It was upstairs. It was a bigger office, but it was upstairs. The office my third office turned out to be more of an office designed for someone like a sole proprietor lawyer or a sole proprietor realtor, not someone who needed a shop. So the big mistake there was choosing a shop that was bigger because I ultimately needed the space, but it was upstairs and it was not retail frontage. So the pandemic and choosing incorrect office space. That's how I ended up here. You know what? I think that's probably the best 11 minutes where I should stop this, because I keep wanting to go forward because the more I think about this, the more I have to talk about. But I think I've just nailed one small topic. So I'm going to call it quits right now, and I'll talk to you maybe tomorrow.